We come now to our Good Friday service, the most somber service of the church year. You notice the altar is stripped. At the end of the Maundy Thursday communion service, the altar girl comes in, takes everything out of the front of the church, and prepares it for our Good Friday service. The Good Friday service that you have is out of the Book of Common Prayer. It includes John's account of the crucifixion and death of Jesus. I encourage you to read that account and then look at the prayers of the church for this service. Very meaningful time for you and worship. I want to tell you a story. The Archbishop of Paris in Notre Dame Cathedral, before its tragic fire, came in to preach a sermon, and he got up into the pulpit, and the sermon was more of a story than a sermon. He told about 30 years before that 3 young men entered the cathedral. They were rather rough, carefree young men. They didn't care at all about religion. They thought religion was a fraud or a trick. So they bet one of the young men to go into the confessional and make up a story to confess to the priest. He didn't want to do it at first, but they kept upping the ante and telling him they'd give him more and more money, or then they said, "Oh, you don't have the nerve to do it." So he went into the confessional and made up this elaborate story to confess to the priest. Fortunately, the old priest saw through it and said to the young man, "Anytime you come in to confess, I have to give you a penance. You have to do something after your confession." And the priest said to the young man, "Today I want you to go into the side chapel, stare at the crucified Christ on the cross, look at him and say, 'I know you have done this for me, but I don't care a damn.'" Well, the young man went out of the confessional booth to meet the other guys, and they said, "What did you do? How did you do? What?" He said he made this story up, and he said the priest said he had to do penance. They said, "Well, we're not going to pay you until you go and finish it and you do penance." So he went into the side chapel alone, stared into the eyes of the crucified Christ, and said, "I know you have done this for me, but..." And then he said it again, "I know you have done this for me, but..." And he couldn't finish it. That started a very painful and long transition in that young man's life, which eventually led him into the priesthood. And the archbishop that day preaching in Notre Dame leaned over the pulpit and looked at the people and said, "That young man is the man who's preaching to you today." On Good Friday, we look into the eyes of the crucified Christ and say, "This you have done for me," and then we fill in the rest. At this service, there's no benediction. We go out in silence.